Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here at the noon hour on Thursday. We're here on History is Here to Help. And to help us understand how history is here to help, we have Peter Hoffenberg, David Rapoport, Gene Rosenfeld. Gene joined us last time, and that was very interesting. So it's a continuation in a manner of speaking. Peter, can you introduce our special guests and contributors today?
Of course, it'd be a pleasure. David Rapoport is Professor Emeritus from UCLA. And many years ago, before anybody was really talking about this, David did important research and publication on terrorism, connections to religion. And more recently, as he's continued his work, he and his colleagues have published what I think will probably be a very helpful reading for our audience, The Democratic Experience and Political Violence. David is now retired in beautiful Southern California, and as you can see from the back, continues researching and reading extensively. And if you don't mind, because I'm not sure if it was here last week, 2 weeks ago, we're joined again by our neighbor, Dr. Gene Rosenfeld, who is a student of Dr. Rapoport's, and on her own has published a volume on, how should we say, Gene, Maori land and religious movements, published a research monograph, and has published articles and done continuous research, as folks remember from 2 weeks ago, on the nexus of populism, religion, and terrorism. So it really is a pleasure and a great honor. And I'm now going to turn it over to you three, and I will just nod knowingly as I agree with what you folks have suggested. So welcome, David and Gene. Good to see you back again.
Thank you, Peter. You're a great co-host. So you guys, I'm so envious of all of you, all three of you, for your depth in this subject. It's a subject where we all need special depth right now, and you become even more valuable, and your help as historians and political scientists all the more important. So David, something that we were going to talk about, and that is, you can look at American history, which is a fabulous thing to look at from the political science point of view, from the historical point of view. We're in a different place, aren't we?
What was that question?
We're in a different place than we've ever been in American history, in the history of political science in this country. Yes or no, and why?
Well, obviously, because of our former president, who refused to accept his defeat. That is unique in American history, and it produced the incident that we're here to discuss.
We have a culture in this country. You guys are better able to define that culture. It's a special American culture. It's extraordinary. And, the world has never seen quite a conglomeration of elements in a given culture. Is what has happened under Trump and in the insurrection and the impeachment and all that, is that consistent with our culture? What points of culture, have been revealed in life under Trump? Or maybe it's inconsistent. And this is all not consistent with American culture.
Well, the obvious thing is that respecting the effect of elections is the most important thing in a democracy, and especially the American democracy. And this violated that. For the first time, even the Civil War didn't question elections.
Yeah, we're in a special place right now.
So, David, do you see, continuing Jay's point, if we take your political point, that protesting explicitly and violently in an election is a unique political moment, do you and Gene think that there are cultural and social precedents? So in other words, rather than thinking of this as an aberration, a complete outlier, is this drawing upon either
At the top.
either precedents or
In-
cultural aspects. Jay, is that fair to say that's
CG, you know,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's Peter Hoffenberg.
I think that there are precedents in the general tenor of things. As you know, I'm a great believer in patterns in group behavior in specific histories in countries. And this is a continuing pattern in that the movements we're seeing today are making use of new cultural ideas and the tech revolution. But that took place in the past after the Civil War. David wrote a very interesting paper on that, on the rise of the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War as a terrorist organization began at first not as one unified movement, but many little movements locally in the South that got under the aegis of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the most respected Confederate officer after the Civil War. And they defeated Reconstruction in 1876. And we had the implementation then of Jim Crow laws up until recent times with the Civil Rights Movement. Then again, we had left-wing agitation during the Vietnam War, but in the 1970s and 80s, we had the rise of the right-wing response to that in the Posse Comitatus, and ultimately the culmination in the 1990s of insurrectionist movements that were greatly challenging federal authorities. We had the rise of the Order, the Covenant Sword and the Arm of the Lord, the Oklahoma City bombing. Are these related to these people today? Yes, indeed they are.
You know, Gene, up to this point, seems to me that these indicia of right-wing violence and all that have been, they're related, but they're not consolidated. There was one person who was at the insurrection on January 6th, and they asked this person, did you think it was a success because you ultimately left the Capitol? And this person said, yes, it was a success. Why was it a success? Because it showed we can do that. And it showed we have the power if we act together. And it brought us together. We were rubbing shoulders with other people of the same persuasion from all over the country. And now we have their email addresses, and now we can talk to them. We are a national movement. Before we were, scattered, fragmented, but now we're together. How do you feel about that, this coming together? Well, how does that change things?
Well, I could let David speak to that first.
Well, I don't think it represents coming together necessarily, because all these movements were involved, or there were militant movements in during the Trump administration. They actually were generated by the Obama administration, but they were reactions to the Obama administration. In the Trump administration, they were support that was given to him, and they involved in a number of violent activities. And the one on January 6th was the first one in which many of them came together, but they were sympathetic to their sympathetic to each other long before.
Yes, but what about the question of degree, David? We saw something we had never seen before. We had an attack on the Capitol and the seat of government. That has never really happened before. I mean, unless you consider the secession of 1861, in the same ilk. But bottom line is, in the 4 years that Trump had been in office, we had an exacerbation and an acceleration of whatever it was that led to that. And I would venture to say that it didn't stop on January 6th, did it?
No, and I have a feeling it's going to be even more intense in a few years.
May I ask what you mean by intense? More violent? Will more people
Yeah.
be involved?
Yeah, yeah. Not necessarily an attack on the Capitol, but more violent groups, right-wing violent groups.
So if I came to you on behalf of the National Guard or maybe the Joint Chiefs and I said, David, we have, I don't know, 15,000 troops in Washington now and a lot of tall fences. Should we keep them there? What would you tell me?
One of the problems which hasn't got very much attention is that the police and military forces or members have been very significant in these movements, militia movements. And even when we hired the National Guard to protect Biden's inauguration, they had to get rid of some of the troops for fear that they might turn against the purpose of the National Guard there. This is a real problem which we really have not looked into. And there's a pattern in Germany recently where the army connected to violent right-wing groups. And I think we may have that problem in this country. We shall see. I think it was 60 people who were arrested were from the military or the police in the riot. That's a significant number.
Mm.
I think the problem,
just a matter of interest, do you think it would be the same had we continued the draft in this country in the 70s?
Well, it started in the draft during the Vietnamese War. Many military turned against the government, and the high point was the Oklahoma City bombing. But militia groups had been formed for the right wing starting with the Vietnam War or afterwards.
Yeah, it sounds like a confusion about who the government really is.
I think that's very
some
powerful.
people in that crowd think that Trump is the government still today.
I think the question you raised, Jay, though, goes beyond National Guard and beyond the armed forces. To me, looking out at what's happened the last 20, 25 years and the generation of the oath movement, it is a local problem. It is a matter of locally selected county sheriffs refusing to, for example, abide by mask regulations. And I worry just personally much more about local law and order. Whereas if David suggests there could be more violence, it's much more likely that more violence is like the murder of the judge's son.
Mm-hmm.
That attacks are made against locally elected officials, governors, for example. And that's often generated by the antagonism among local police, local sheriffs, particularly in this country, the question of in a county, is a sheriff must the sheriff abide by the mayor's rules and the county board's rules, or some other set? So if you look at the people who participated, among those who participated were local policemen. It turns out there's an ex-New York cop who attacked a Capitol policeman. So it's not necessarily a national or federal issue. Once again, it's very much a local issue, and whether or not local governments can remain democratic and strong. And I agree with David that we're going to see many more actions, but I think there are more actions that are going to be local. Like I really would be very surprised if there's another attack on the Capitol.
This is
So Gene, can I ask you this? We've heard since January 6th a lot of attempts to explain and the revelation that this had been going on a long time in the hinterland, and it's a hinterland problem, as Peter says. But my question to you is getting back to Trump for a moment. He's a strange animal in terms of the social psychology of him, such as we saw in Europe. Maybe not the same, but similar somehow, similar benchmarks. And so my question is a but-for question. So we saw this now in the time of his administration. We certainly saw it, on January 6th. Is he catalytic here? Did his statements and his moves as president and the moves of the people around him, did they have a catalytic effect on what was already happening?
Well, Trump is a charismatic leader. That means he doesn't come up in the usual way through the ranks. He is promoted by his followers. Trump had what he called a movement years in advance of becoming president. He does not refer to his party nearly as often as he refers to his movement. That movement, being president, enabled him to bring that movement into the Republican Party and basically execute a hostile takeover. And he is continuing that. He has not stopped doing what he's done for many years and decades, which is to build a movement of which he can be the head and the savior. He can be the messiah of people who have in the 1980s lost their farms to the government, to the bankers, who accepted the ideology, the Christian patriot ideology of the posse comitatus, which, as Peter was saying, believes that only the local sheriff should be the main executive of our government, and that we should have townships and regions, not states. And this should be a white commonwealth. So the white supremacy premise that survived Hitler found new life in these small scattered groups after World War II. However, in addition to that, the United States has two things which the European countries do not. It has a Second Amendment, which allows everyone to have guns and weapons. And it has a freedom of speech, which enables propaganda to proliferate. So that the propaganda of the white supremacist movement and the neo-Nazi movements moved from America to Europe after World War II. Before World War II, the influence of the right wing in the 30s was from Europe to America. And we had the formation of things like the Silver Shirts and the German-American Bund that was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee. But after World War II, we've had a movement in the opposite direction. And we've had connections which are informal connections, because these are people to whom freedom and liberty have a meaning that is very special to them and only to them, because they see their ranks being overcome by foreigners and racially different people. So they are fighting for their survival. And that's why David Lane's 14 words, which was meant to capture unity in this many flavored group, means something to them. And that is, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. And that's what they're about, that and guns.
Yeah, guns make a big difference. If you have a gun and the other fellow doesn't, you have a huge advantage, especially if you're willing to use the gun. And I guess they are.
It's also, though, I think we have to recognize it's also a matter of the type of weapon, right? I mean, we are talking about folks with military grade weaponry. So that's another connection. And I agree entirely with Gene. But I also think that, amending the Second Amendment is not going to be easy or getting it removed. But we do need a more commonsensical application when we talk about weaponry. I mean, the idea of somebody walking around like the kid in Wisconsin, right? An 18-year-old with a military grade weapon is a problem. I would agree with Gene politically. I think, though, I would push the cultural and scientific argument back to the United States. After all, it's the social Darwinists at the end of the 19th century in the US who talked in racial terms. The 1920s Immigration Act here provided an intellectual impetus for both Nazis and Afrikaners. So one of the interesting questions we have is taking Gene's political history and applying the fact that the ideas and the understanding of how society should be organized in good part comes from our own shores. For some reason, though, we were able to keep this under check until recently. So the idea of being replaced, right? I mean, like Gene, right? The white supremacist movement has this idea that whites will be replaced. That's an old, late 19th century American publication, which lay dormant, was taken up by the Afrikaners and the Nazis, and now has once again become, an American issue. So if we talk about culture and ideas, they're home-based. They don't need Europe.
Yeah, but the question, I would put this to David. The question is, would January 6th have happened without Trump's incitement? And could it happen again without Trump's incitement? Does it have a life of its own, or does it require Trump or somebody just like Trump?
Well, the January 6th thing was obviously generated by Trump's unwillingness to accept the results of the election. And what is amazing is that so many people followed him in that respect. That was astonishing, and it's still significant, I think. Many people still don't believe that the Democrats really won the election. And as long as that keeps a significant, as long as that is a position that many adhere to, we have a problem, which I don't think we've ever had before.
Could it happen again without Trump?
I think so, but it's hard to tell. I'm not good at predicting.
I think one of the key
so many historians say that to me.
One of the key issues is going to be whether or not the 120 to 150 voter suppression rules are applied. I think that's one of the things we should look for. Republicans across the country have almost 150 measures locally and statewide to essentially suppress voting. And I think that is going to be a key factor in whether or not a minority group like this is able to mobilize or not. And I think, unfortunately, I don't want this to be mistaken, that I think it's less Trump as president and more the inability really for many white Americans to accept Obama as a president. I think the big lies go back to the birther issue. And Trump was a major pusher of the birther issue. the birther issue right essentially delegitimized that election by saying that Obama, an African American, should not have been president. And as a historian, at least that's where I see this picking up. And so there's a very funny line in Between the Ferns where Zach asks Obama what it's like to be the last Black president. And in a way, Zach, the comedian, was very prescient, right? He understood that that election would exacerbate these issues.
Yeah. Gene, I want to
And,
ask you about an area that you've been involved in, and we spoke briefly about it
Can I-
last time.
I think David wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, David wanted
David?
to add something to
Oh,
that.
sorry, David?
Yeah, I think Biden's choice of a Black American woman to be his vice president is a very dangerous thing, especially since he is so old and he may not survive his own term. He was an Obama supporter, of course, and I think one reason that Harris was taken as the vice president was because Biden was committed to Obama's race, etc. And I think this may be a very important issue in a few years.
I think it's
Why is it dangerous, David?
Pardon?
What is the danger?
Oh, the danger is the same danger that Obama generated. He, in reaction to him, created, not created, but regenerated racial feelings in this country, which are very important now. And I think that's going to be continued or reignited if she becomes the president. And also, I think it's important to realize that while Biden beat Trump badly, the Republicans, for some reason or another, are very close to taking over Congress again. And in the elections which follow a president, the congressional elections always seem to go to the opposition. We may be in great trouble soon.
I agree with David, particularly if, David, the connection is the voter registry repression laws. If those are applied, they will certainly take over the House, if not the Senate. And I think the other reason why the vice president was chosen was, I think we have to be honest, the consistent, enduring backbone of the Democratic Party in this country are African American women. Stacey Abrams is just the face of that. Without the politicking and activities of African American women in particular, the Democrats certainly would have lost Georgia, and we wouldn't be even having this conversation anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gene. It's
Well,
a Tom Munich session. You got to just jump in.
I would just
like your sheep.
echo that, Peter, I was about to say, speaking up for the women, we have not completed the question that Michelle Obama raised implicitly when she said that is not who we are. And the issue to be decided going forward is, who are we? Are we a nation of immigrants? Or are we a nation of white refugees from a hostile Europe seeking religious freedom on the shores of a few northern colonies? If we are a nation of immigrants, we have many foundation stories. We have 1619, but we also have the 1500s in New Mexico, and we have the kingdom in Hawaii, and we have the Creole in Louisiana. We have many foundational histories that compete with the Pilgrim notion. This is who which narrative will dominate? Which ideology binds us together?
Mhm.
All of us, to an extent, to be a nation, we have to accept nationalism. And Mussolini was very far ahead of his time in noting that the symbol of the sheaves bound together,
Mhm.
the fasces, was that which symbolized the people. And I won't speak in favor of fascism, but I will only quote the great sociologist Robert Bellah, or at least paraphrase him, that fascism is the most comfortable ideology for the working class, for the ordinary person.
Well, we have the CPAC conference taking place now, today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday. And on Sunday, Donald Trump is going to make some sort of speech. My guess is that he's stocked the conference with his own supporters. And his speech will be a kind of speech we've seen before, a rally speech. But I think it will tell us a lot about the conservative movement in this country. It will tell us a lot about, the things you've been talking about. How important is this CPAC conference? What shadow will it cast on the 2022 election?
Well, I just very briefly, this is the first step in running for the 2024 nomination. So what I would look for after his speech is how many potential Republican nominees suddenly have no interest, suddenly are not going to Iowa and New Hampshire, etc. There are about 6 to 10 who are lined up. And I think if he clearly says, vote for me in 2024, you're going to see all those people scurrying away. Romney admitted the other day, he said nobody wants to take him on. So that's the first thing I would look for, the reaction of other people, whether they take seriously his effort to get the nomination in 2024.
So David, do you think he can win? And if so, what are the factors in play as to whether he can or cannot win?
I don't really know. I think that the racial thing is the crucial one, and the white supremacist sentiment, which dominates so much of America today. We're not a country of immigration. We are a country of white immigrants, refugees from Europe. I don't know. I can't answer the question.
I should ask you after Sunday. Maybe it'll be clearer then. See what his speech is about and how people react to him. But Gene, you've talked about religion and terrorism and violence before, and you've written about it. And I wonder where that plays, in this discussion of history and culture and Trump and the future of the country. Where does religion play? I mean, he's connected with the evangelicals. They support him still today in every way. Where do they fit?
If you want to know what Trump's appeal and powers are, look up his speech and watch it to the Miami evangelicals about a year ago. That is a signature speech for Trump, and he was masterful at drawing them in. The evangelicals he was speaking to in Miami are actually on the fringe of the evangelical movement. But he was demonstrating all of the skills of a major charismatic leader. Now, charisma can be used for good, it can be used for ill. It was being used for ill, to divide us. He has been focusing on dividing us, but he wants to cut off a large portion of the voters, and that become his signature movement. And it will stay with him whether he's president or not, or president again. This is how, if you study the rise of fascist movements to the national level, which has happened infrequently in history, mainly Italy and Germany, if you study that, you will see how people who are showmen and charismatic leaders like Mussolini and Hitler can massage that support into taking advantage of a free democratic regime, or at least a weak one, and achieve power through regular channels with a minority, a large minority. And that's important because Trump has never had a majority. My feeling is that after the January 6th debacle, which was intended, again, to divide us, he wants us to choose between the party of light and the party of darkness. And that is radical dualism, which is an apocalyptic scenario. These people were calling for war. That's what their Boogaloo means, is war, racial war, and Rohawa, and all these things. They all come together with Trump. So religious, yes, because it's ultimate. War is always life and death. Religion is always about life and death. It's ultimate concern. That's how we scholars define it when we look at new religions arising and movements. So yes, this is religious. And I will just end by quoting a great historian of religion, Houston Smith, who was one of the 3 guys that participated in the LSD experiments, but he was much more than that. Houston Smith said in one of his very last talks, and he was talking about Islamic terrorism, he feels that religion is the most important factor in history. Why? It motivates people like no other factor. It changes the way we live. It shapes our civilizations. It answers the question, who are we and who aren't we? We are the ones, but you are not the ones. It creates the other to expel from the body politic.
Oh, I think I'm going to move to Tasmania.
I was going to say we're going to have to schedule another ThinkTech, because we left off with that last time, and I wanted to talk to you about that last time. So
Peter, we're about out of time, Peter.
I know we are. So I want to thank. I just want to thank David.
Some parting words.
Well, I'm hoping to have David and Jean back again. Jean, you might have to be a permanent fixture. It seems to me, from what David and Jean have so fruitfully brought, we're faced with a couple of key issues that our audience can think about. The significance of religion, but even defining religion as Jean has, how religion can be for what we can accept as a public interest and not necessarily as a divisive interest. So I look very interestingly at this presidency. Biden is the most religious, I think, president we've had since Jimmy Carter. Clearly Christian, clearly Catholic. And I look at that as a very interesting narrative. Going to church, he is the Catholic social gospel in many ways. And that's something we forget about when we focus on intolerant Christianity in this country. So I look forward to talking to Jean about religion and the various ways in which religion can be used, though. Okay. And I'd like David to come back, because David is not good at self-promotion, so I will promote him. David has a very important theory about terrorism, which is this theory of different waves of terrorism. And I'd very much like it, David, if you could come back and talk to us a bit about whether you think what we're seeing now, not just in the US, right? Because what happened January 6th is happening around the world. These kinds of populist exercises of violence, and to see whether we can think about today as another wave. So I thank both of you. I hope we can see you again, and wish you good health. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Look forward to our next discussion together.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you.